One fateful evening, Alex was busy in the sitting room watching TV when Stanley entered. He had made up his mind. He was tired of living a life of poverty and shame. He wanted to make his mother proud, and he was willing to do whatever it took to achieve that. Stanley sat across from Alex, his eyes locked on his. "I've made up my mind," he said, his voice firm. "I want to join your fraternity." Alex's face lit up with a smile. "I knew you'd see it my way," he said. "But I have to warn you, Stanley, once you're in, there's no turning back." Stanley nodded, his mind made up. "I'm willing to take that risk," he said. "But I need you to promise me one thing." "What's that?" Alex asked. "There will be no shedding of blood," Stanley said, his eyes locked on Alex. "I don't want to hurt anyone." Alex smiled reassuringly. "I promise you, Stanley, there will be no shedding of blood. You have my word." Stanley nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. He had made the right decision. In less than 1 week, money started flowing in. Stanley was making so much money that he began to feel fulfilled. He had never imagined that being wealthy could be this simple. He left the city of Lagos and relocated to Delta, where no one knew him. He started a new life, opening a big shop, buying a car, renting an apartment, and investing heavily. Stanley's life was transformed overnight. He was living the life he had always dreamed of, and he had Alex and the fraternity to thank for it. Meanwhile, all the time Stanley was struggling on the streets, Stacy would often call him, sometimes sneaking out of the house to bring him food and other essentials. She believed in Stanley's innocence, but no one dared go against her father's will. Their friendship continued to blossom even after Stanley met Alex. When Stanley relocated to Delta, he changed his mobile number, but he and Stacy remained in contact. After establishing himself in Delta and setting up his businesses, Stanley decided to travel to the village to see his mother. Stella was shocked when she saw her son, now a successful and wealthy young man. She shouted for joy, tears streaming down her face. "Indeed, God has remembered me," she exclaimed, embracing her son tightly. Stanley was overwhelmed with emotion as he hugged his mother back. He had finally made her proud, and he knew that all his struggles had been worth it. He spent the next few days in the village, spending quality time with his mother and catching up on lost time. It had been 2 years since Stanley's wealth and success. He had built another house for his mother in the village, and his friendship with Stacy had blossomed into a romantic relationship, albeit in secret, as her father would disown her if he found out. Stanley had recruited many other young boys into the fraternity and was happy with his accomplishments. He had given his mother the life she desired, his girlfriend Stacy the life she desired, and himself the life he desired. Things were going smoothly until the 3rd year of his membership in the fraternity. During one of their meetings, Stanley was called out by their spiritual godfather. It was time to bring forth another soul, but this time, the request was different. The spirit they served demanded something more, something that Stanley was not prepared to give. The godfather's words sent chills down Stanley's spine. "The blood of your mother is all that is needed for you to continue growing in wealth," he said. Stanley was horrified. How could he kill his mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything for him? He couldn't do it. When the meeting was over, Stanley went to Alex's house, angry and confrontational. "Why did you lie to me?" he demanded. "You promised me there would be no shedding of blood." Alex looked irritated, but Stanley didn't care. "Do the needful," Alex said. "Time awaits no one." Stanley's eyes widened in shock as Alex revealed a dark secret. "I thought it was going to be forever," Alex said, not until a few months ago when our godfather demanded my only sister for sacrifice." Stanley's voice was barely above a whisper. "Did you actually kill your sister?" Alex nodded, and Stanley felt like he had been punched in the gut. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Stanley was torn apart by the weight of his decision. He couldn't bear the thought of taking his mother's life, but the alternative was equally unbearable, losing everything he had worked for and facing death himself. Time was running out, and Stanley knew he had to make a choice. 2 days had passed, leaving him with only 5 days to complete the assignment. After much agonizing, he made the difficult decision to go through with the plan. Stanley returned to the village, disguising his true intentions with a facade of affection. He showered his mother with gifts and attention, trying to make the most of the little time they had left together. Stella noticed that something was amiss, but Stanley brushed off her concerns. As the days went by, Stanley's behavior became increasingly peculiar. He insisted on sleeping beside his mother, holding her tightly and hugging her as if he would never let her go. He helped her with every chore, no matter how small, and showered her with love and attention. But despite his outward display of affection, Stanley's heart was heavy with the knowledge of what he had planned. It was a choice he had to make, no matter how difficult it seemed. But as the days ticked by, Stanley couldn't shake off the feeling that he was about to make a terrible mistake. All the days Stella felt something was really off. She called him one day to ask what the problem was, because the son she knew would never stay in the village for more than 2 days. But here he was, staying for 3 days, and she was very worried. But as usual, Stanley would just brush it off, hugging her and telling her how much he loved her, also asking that she forgive him. This made Stella curious, but regardless, her son told her to trust him, that everything was going to be okay. He told her that he was just facing some business issues, while Stella tried to be his confidant and told him that everything was going to be alright. Now, on the last day before the assignment expired, they had slept together as usual, lying side by side. Stanley hugged his mother while sleeping beside her. But little did Stella know, Stanley already had a knife hidden in the locker beside their bed. Immediately Stella was fast asleep, Stanley stood up, clutching onto the knife, and looked at his mother, who was sleeping peacefully. This was a painful decision, but he had to take it, one that would leave him in regret. He stood there, staring at his mother, thinking of the many times she had suffered just to make sure he was able to feed. And now, this. Their time on earth couldn't last. He looked at her, crying bitterly. And in a flash, blood splashed the entire room. Stella woke up in a daze, feeling as if something was off. As she looked up at her son in shock, she screamed. Just then, Stanley stumbled onto the ground in a pool of his own blood. What had he done? Stella asked. Stanley had just stabbed himself. He couldn't take the weight of killing his mother, and he couldn't take the weight of killing his mother, so he chose to die instead. Stella screamed, rushing toward Stanley, trying to revive him, but all was to no avail. Her cries pierced deep into the night as she called for help. She dragged him into the car, and luckily, some security and vigilantes were on duty. They heard her cries and rushed to her aid, helping her drive Stanley to the hospital. But upon arrival, he was declared dead. Stella wailed, her cries echoing through the hospital compound. She stripped herself naked in the middle of the night, asking God why he had taken her son. She cried deeply, to the point where she began to act like a lunatic. By morning time, she still couldn't believe that her son was dead. Despite the tears and pleas of those around her, she refused to accept her fate. She was later taken to a rehab, while Stanley's body was taken to the mortuary. Everything Stanley had worked for vanished into thin air. A month later, when Stella was beginning to recover from the mental issues that arose from Stanley's death, he was buried. Yet, she still couldn't believe her life had taken such a drastic turn. Several times, she tried to poison herself, trying to kill herself, but all was to no avail. Every time she tried, she couldn't die. Definitely, God was not yet done with her. Stacy, on the other hand, had not heard from Stanley for quite a long time. She traced him back to their village, only to meet his mother in a pitiful state. The air was gloomy, and Stacy was confused. When she tried asking Stella about Stanley, Stella smiled in a strange, almost menacing way, like someone who had lost their grip on reality. Then, she pointed in a direction, leaving Stacy confused. Stacy followed the direction and saw a fresh grave. She was taken aback, unsure of what was happening. As she asked Stella what had happened, why she was showing her the grave, Stella chased her with a cutlass. Stacy ran, trying to catch her breath. When she ran out of the compound, she met one of the women in the village. The woman narrated the story of Stanley's death and how his mother had become a lunatic due to the pain of losing her only son. Stacy couldn't believe her ears. Tears filled her eyes as she cried uncontrollably, calling out Stanley's name and asking why he had died at this point in his life. She couldn't understand what had happened or how he died. She managed to find her way back to the city, her heart heavy with grief. The gap that Stanley left in her heart was indelible. She couldn't forget about him in a hurry. It was painful for her to bear, but she had to face the reality that Stanley was dead. It had been 7 years since Stanley's passing. His mother, Stella, had become a shadow of her former self. Despite every effort to keep her in the rehab center, she had managed to escape and took to roaming the streets of the village. That was until her very good friend, who had returned from the city, intervened. She sent men to capture Stella and brought her back to her house. From then on, Stella's friend made sure she was well taken care of, sending food to her daily and hiring someone to look after her. Stella's daily routine consisted of visiting her son's grave, picking pebbles, and removing weeds. She treated that spot as if it was sacred, never allowing a single blade of grass to grow. She would sit there, smiling, with a toy in her hand, calling out to Stanley, telling him how much she missed him and how difficult life had been. On those days when she talked to her son, people would think she was normal, for she spoke with a clarity and sobriety that belied her true state. But after those quiet moments with Stanley, she would become agitated and start behaving like someone who was mentally ill. Her friend and caregiver would watch her with a mixture of sadness and compassion, knowing that Stella's grip on reality was tenuous at best. They could only hope that one day, she would find peace and closure, and be able to let go of the pain that had consumed her life. On one of the days, Stella busied herself with her daily ritual of picking pebbles and clearing weeds from her son's grave. Her mind wandered to the memories of Stanley. Suddenly, she noticed footsteps approaching. She turned, expecting to see her caregiver, but instead, her eyes landed on a little boy who pierced her as though he was Stanley. Beside him was a very beautiful lady. Stella's heart skipped a beat as she stumbled towards the boy, her arms outstretched. "Stanley," she exclaimed, tears streaming down her face. "My son." The boy looked up at Stella with curious eyes, but Stella didn't notice. She was too busy holding him tight, inhaling his scent, and feeling his warmth. It was as if her son, Stanley, had come back to her. The young lady watched as she smiled through tears. Stella's caregiver offered them a seat before asking the young lady who she was. Meanwhile, Stella held the young boy whose name was Jason very close. No doubt, the young boy had an unmistakable resemblance as Stanley, and Stella held him like her life was dependent on the young boy. The young lady cleared her throat. She had been waiting for this moment for so long. While Stella held the boy, she began, "My name is Stacy Moore, Stanley's friend. Motsi Okafor's daughter, the man who brought your late son to the city." She continued amidst tears as she narrated how she and Stanley dated in secret, and eventually had an affair, which led to her being pregnant. It was at that time she had come to look for him, to tell him about my pregnancy, after not being able to reach him, only to be met with the devastating news of his death. By this time, tears were already flowing freely from their eyes. From the caregiver to Stella to Stacy, everyone was shedding tears. For every time Stanley's name was mentioned, it created an emotional turmoil. He was the meekest, gentlest and loving son, wife, brother or friend anyone could have. Stella's grip on Stanley Jr. tightened as Stacy continued further. She explained how she was sent abroad to give birth and to heal. But 3 years after Jason's birth, Stanley's spirit started disturbing her to return to his mother so she could see him through her grandchild, Jason. For the past 4 years, his spirit didn't leave her alone. It kept urging her to return. In his words, "More, Jason was your only hope." As Stacy finished speaking, Stella looked up, her eyes locking onto Stanley Jr.'s. Jason gave her a knowing smile just like Stanley always did when he was of Jason's age. For the first time, Stella smiled freely. He remembered her after all, her son did remember her. Standing right in front of her was her son Stanley in the body of another. She knew, she felt it. He reincarnated. And in that moment, something miraculous happened. Stella's madness began to lift, replaced by a sense of clarity and purpose. She held Jason by the hands, whispering words of gratitude and love. "Obiadulam," she called him. "Thank you for coming back to me. Thank you for giving me hope again." As the three of them stood there, surrounded by the quiet of the village, it was as if time had stood still. The air was filled with a sense of redemption, of forgiveness, and of new beginnings. And as they stared at each other, the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the village. It was a new dawn for Stella, one filled with promise and hope. And as she looked at Stanley Jr., she knew that her son's legacy would live on, and that she would never be alone again. And in a flickering moment, Stanley's spirit disappeared.